Hey everyone, welcome back to Farm Life and Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Amy Bell. Welcome back to Farm Life and Freedom, where we are cultivating a free life. Today, we are going to be delving back into some more gardening issues, things about gardening that people need to look into a little bit more closely if you are really serious about making the most of what you can or do grow. Now, today's subject is going to be all about crop rotation. I know everyone's like glaze over the eyes, and a lot of people think, and I know this was me, think crop rotation back from when I was a kid. I heard a little bit about it. Well, it was something about potato blight, and you didn't want to grow potatoes in the same spot because of the diseases. Okay, well, that does have something to do with it, but it's so much more than that. And while it can be a little confusing, it is incredibly important, and it's something that if you put a little bit of time and effort into it, say when you're planting your garden, and right now, this is the time we're in full swing. We're harvesting, we're maintaining, we're planting new things. Right now, we're just kind of in the middle of gardening season. However, this is still a good time to go ahead and plan next year's garden. If you get it knocked out early enough, then you can kind of sail through the fun stuff, ordering the seeds and getting that started. Okay. We're going to talk about crop rotation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, some details and kind of some ideas of how to go about setting up your own crop rotation system. I've got my notes here so that I may not ramble. Okay, so crop rotation is a major component of sustainable agriculture. Now, that's something that I personally lean to for a variety of reasons. One, I like the organic nature of it. I like the fact that I can use nature to take care of itself, and I'm not having to spend lots of money on chemicals for my garden to amend this and amend that. And things are much more natural. The food that I feed my family is natural. It's healthier. And we're not going to grow third arms out of our temples and stuff. So that's something that I like about sustainable agriculture and organic gardening. Crop rotation is a really, really good part of organic gardening. But honestly, any gardening, even if you are one who uses the chemicals and what have you. No judgment. This is one that, of the agricultural practices that have been around for a long time, this one is like age old. I don't know who originally came up with it, but it must have been a really long time ago. And they must have had some horrible thing happen. And, Farmer Fred decided, well, I'm going to plant this stuff somewhere else and just see what happens. And it's been happening for a long, long time. Way, way back. It's a practice that involves growing different types of crops in a specific order on the same piece of land over a period of time. Now, follow me on this. I know that was a really long sentence, like multiple compounds, but the whole idea of crop rotation is you have your garden plot, whether it be, one big rectangle that you grow in rows, or you have sections or raised beds or what have you. The whole idea of it is the things that you grow this year in each particular spot, don't grow them there next year. Move them to a different location. We're going to rotate them out. We're going to move them around. And there's a lot of benefits to doing this. Some of the benefits are improved soil fertility, increased crop diversity, reduced pest and disease infestations, hallelujah, improved water retention, increased yields. Now that's just to name a few. There are other benefits, but those are some of the biggies. The whole idea is that you are growing different crops in the same area in successive seasons. So see, when you're looking at it, trying to figure it out, you can look at it as the area, and you're rotating crops through that particular area. Or you can look at it as the crop, and you're placing that crop in a new home every year for a particular cycle, for a set amount of years, okay? Seasons. So you can, I guess whichever one is better for you, whichever way makes it simpler for you, then look at it that way. But I'm going to tell you some strategies, okay? There are various strategies of how to go about doing a crop rotation plan. Now, we're going to talk about two of them. We're going to talk about the 3-year cycle and the 4-year cycle, okay? In a 3-year cycle, you are rotating 3 options, okay? That doesn't mean 3 plants. You've got lots of different plants that you want to grow. I'm sure if you're just like me, man, I grow whatever I can get my hands on. But they are categorized into 3 different groups, okay? We have heavy feeders, givers, and low feeders, okay? So some examples of heavy feeders would include brassicas, like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, that kind of thing. I say this wrong every time. It's not curcubits, it's cucurbits, okay? Cucumbers, melons, squashes, that kind of thing. Lettuces, spinach, nightshades. So that's the tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, white potatoes. Corn, heavy feeder, garlic. So those are some examples of plants that suck a lot of the nutrients out of the ground. Okay? If you've followed along a little bit, early on in some of my earlier episodes, I talked about soil testing and soil amending. You always want to be testing and helping your soil, okay? Because it doesn't say, you may have tested at the beginning of the season and think, oh man, I've got great soil. I don't have to worry about this anymore. No, because your soil does not stay that way. We are constantly pulling things out of the soil. We are constantly adding things back into the soil. So you want to make sure that you continue your testing so you know where your soil stands. Now, when you say heavy feeder, the plants that you have that are heavy feeders in those particular areas, by the end of the season, those areas are going to be mostly depleted of a variety of nutrients, things that plants need. So if you just continue, say corn is a very heavy feeder, needs lots of nitrogen. And if you continue to plant corn in the same plot every year, and let's say you are organic and you don't put chemical fertilizers down, your corn will deplete that soil. There will be nothing left for it to feed off of. And let's say you do put chemical fertilizers down, your corn will pull that nutrient, but it won't be getting anything else. It won't be adding back. That soil will, for one, become over amended at some point during the season, but also it will lose its structure. The soil structure is actually quite important. The amount of organic matter that is in the soil, and crop rotation can help a lot with that. But that's just an idea. Okay, so you have your heavy feeders, tomatoes and what have you. I grow lots of tomatoes, and normally multiple beds, multiple very large beds of tomatoes. So what comes after that for me, I have to really pay attention to, because I need my tomatoes to grow well. So they're going to suck up all the nutrients, and then whatever comes after that has to replenish, okay? So then the next one after that can have something too. Okay, so now those are examples of heavy feeders. Now, examples of givers would be, I'm sure you've heard, legumes. Legumes fix nitrogen. That's peas and beans, clovers. They fix nitrogen from the air into the soil, okay? And that's a fantastic thing. You do not have to go and purchase nitrogen to place in your soil. If you plant legumes, they will do the job for you, and they'll do it naturally. So those are givers. And then some examples of low feeders would be some of your root crops, greens, some of your herbs, things that don't really take a whole lot. That is the season of rest. Okay, in a 3-year cycle, you have your heavy feeding season where it's just depleting it. And then you have your giving season where everything's being, put back. And then you have a rest season where everything's just kind of hanging out, growing and not really damaging the soil, but not really adding a whole lot back to it either. It's just a rest season. So in a 3-year cycle, that's what you would do. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about what a 4-year cycle looks like before we talk about how to go about putting this together. So in a 4-year cycle, now, like I said, there's a variety of different strategies that different gardeners use when they're coming up with a rotation plan. And you want to use the one that works best for you, works best for your property. But this is a couple of good examples and something to follow. I was trying to pick something that's easy to follow. Okay, so in the 4-year cycle, here's the order in which it goes. You have legumes. Obviously, those are givers. They put the nitrogen in. Then you have, directly after legumes, you put in the leafy greens and brassicas, okay? Then directly after that is your fruiting vegetables, and then directly after that is your rooting vegetables, okay? So legumes, we talked about that, peas, beans, soybeans, chickpeas, lentils, all of that is nitrogen fixing. Okay, then your leafy and brassicas, your lettuce, spinach, broccoli, cauliflower, all of that stuff. Then your fruiting veggies, which are tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, cucumbers, squashes, all of that. And then your rooting veggies, which turnips, radishes, beets, garlic, onions, carrots. So that's the order in which they would cycle. Okay? Now, I know you probably want to grow every single one of those every year, right? If you're like me, you do. So then you have to determine where you're going to place them within your garden. Now, I'm going to add in 2 additional elements here, okay? Now, recently I did an episode and multiple posts on twoaksfarmtalk.com about companion planting. Companion planting is something that goes hand in hand with crop rotation. It's an element of organic gardening. It's something that helps you to make a natural garden without having to go and spend tons of money on chemical fertilizers and all that. So companion planting will actually assist you in your rotation schedule. It'll assist you in adding elements back to your soil, which you are depleting. The other thing, and what my next episode will cover, is cover cropping. That is huge. It is something that every gardener needs to look into. Every farmer needs to look into. Most farmers, especially if they're larger scale, are already doing this. It would be difficult to not do this because your soil gets so messed up if on a large scale if you're not using a cover crop. Okay, so those two things are those are things you really need to look into to add to your rotation schedule. But to go back to, at this point, how to implement your rotation cycle. Whichever one you choose, whichever way you decide to go, I'm going to give you some basic tips on how to go about setting this up. When you choose one, let's just say, I'm going to pull this back up. Let's just say that we decide to go with the 3-year cycle, okay? Now, all that means is everything gets rotated in 3 years. It's back to the way it was, right? So you would go heavy feeders and then givers and then low feeders and then you're back to heavy feeders again, okay? And you're that way you're amending your soil each time as you go. If you are like me, then you have like raised beds and maybe garden spots here and there. That's what I do. And if you look at my farm tour, I showed you a bunch of that. I use my grid paper and I plan out and map out my gardens. And I do this regardless of what I'm doing. I plan out and map out my gardens and I write in what I'm planting there. I write in, if it failed, then I scratch it out and put something else in. I make sure that I keep a good chart of what I'm planting in what bed. We name the beds. I make sure that I know what I'm doing here. Well, because I won't remember later. That's something, if that hasn't happened to you yet, just start writing it down because it's going to happen to you, I promise. Okay, so you have your grid, your layout, you write them down, and this is where I've got my tomatoes, this is where I've got my squash, whatever. Then you look at, for the next year, go ahead and make copies of your layout because then for the next year, you look at that and say, okay, I have my tomatoes here, so let's look at my chart, and that's a heavy feeder. So what needs to go next is a giver, and so I can pick something in the legume family, peas, beans, lentils, anything that fixes nitrogen. Or going with the cover crop, I could throw in a season of clover or something like that. Something that is a cover crop that can add back to my soil, and I skip a vegetable in that particular bed at that moment. Wait until the following season comes around. That is the base way of setting up your rotation schedule. Now, if you go in to start researching crop rotation, one, your eyes will blur because there's so much information out there. Some of it is extraneous. Some of it is just, okay, it's great tips if you are already in the midst of a great rotation schedule and you just want to add another element. But if you are just getting started on crop rotation, my suggestion to you is start small. Start in the most basic way that you can and get yourself used to the idea of planning and mapping out and rotating your crops. And then start, if you want to get fancy with it afterwards, once you're used to what you're doing, then start adding in this element or that element. But that is the basis of crop rotation. And I suggest, honestly, to everyone, all the gardeners that I speak with, once they get going, I don't ever tell a brand new beginner gardener, hey, you've got to jump in and do some rotation. I don't ever do that because when you're first getting started in gardening, sometimes it's overwhelming for people, especially if they've never done it before. Sometimes it can be very overwhelming. And crop rotation is something that can, all by itself, can be overwhelming if you're not prepared for it. The last thing I will say about crop rotation is that there are, in my view, in my mind, there are two main challenges, let's say, to adopting a crop rotation schedule. The first one is the whole planning and keeping track of the rotation schedule. Like I said, that's not easy. That's not exactly the easiest thing to do. It takes a little bit of time. Sitting down, drawing out your layout, mapping everything out, making sure that you know you've got it written down exactly what is in each particular area, and then going directly to next year's map and go ahead and put in, okay, tomatoes here, so next year I'm putting, peas here. If you do it that way, that will make things much easier for you in the future. I think it's the challenge there is that initial laying out, initially figuring out where everything should go and when it should go there. And then the other one is if you work with raised beds or small garden plots, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to figure out, well, how can I move this stuff around to make sure that everything gets grown, but not in the same place, and again, and then within 3 years or whatever. It's not as hard once you get going. Okay, once you get started and kind of get a feel for it, it becomes easier. But take my advice on this for certain. Draw yourself out a map of your gardens, make some copies, and then just start writing it down. Put the year at the top. Start writing it down. This is what we're doing this year. So next year, this is what we're going to do. And have some fun rotating those crops. Be sure, guys, and come back on the next episode and check out cover cropping. That is something that you're definitely going to want to check into, and for this year as well. The crop rotation, since we're already in the middle of it, you're going to be getting a schedule together if you work on it right now for the next season. But you can go ahead and get your stuff together for cover cropping right now. Okay, so be sure and come back and join us for that. Until next time, you guys have a great week.